that help
Bill's
now.
waiting for the reel
And
to reel
we
again.
caught it early. I took them Saturday morning because it's
Beth, we're ready.
Beth, we're ready.
104.9
We're ready?
again.
Okay.
Goddamn.
All right, at 7:34, we will call the Board of Finance meeting to order. First item on the agenda, consider election of officers of the Board of Finance. That would be me. I believe that is typically the same slate of officers as the regular school board meeting.
It typically is, if that's what the board would like to do.
So I need a motion for a slate of officers for the Board of Finance.
I make a motion that we continue with our, since the board is the same for 2025, I make the motion that we resume the same status of our officers for the Board of Finance as well as it was in 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Ward. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, receive report on financial condition using fiscal and qualitative indicators. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherry. So this is per statute, the financial report for the condition of the district here over the last year. And we will be using the qualitative indicators as presented through the DUAB organization that is through the state. So we're just going to kind of walk through these here. If I can get my, yeah, we're going to try to. Where did my mouse go?
Your 3
There we
minutes is
go.
almost
Okay.
up.
This is just the statute that says that we have to review these on an annual basis at the first meeting in January. As we kind of look through here, we're looking at our free and reduced. This is just student demographics. Just looking at the free and reduced lunch numbers as a percentage. Looking at our special education numbers as a percentage, and also looking at our English language learners as a percentage of our student population. As you can see, free and reduced crept up slightly. Actually, special education, we're still trying to track this down because we don't believe that's quite accurate. We don't feel that that should have been a decline this past year, but we're still digging through that. And then obviously we've all felt or had seen the English language learners, how much of an uptick that has taken this past year, as we have numerous students who are moving into the district and therefore who do not have English as the primary language, which is, again, in turn showing where those numbers are starting to head. As we look here at the certified net assessed value, we've had the conversation about this many a times. We know that it continues to increase. Went up again almost another 20% this past year. So again, nothing new that we've not talked about there. Average daily membership, again, looking at the count of our students. This is taken in October, and then we will also be taking another count coming up here on February 1st. But again, we can see that we're on a pretty significant uptick with the number of students that we've had enrolling and moving into the district and transferring into the district. If we look at over the last year, up about 150 students that we, again, have talked about in the past, but again, just to kind of represent that here on the graph to show where we're at. When we look at total fund balance, this includes all of the funds within the district. So when we typically have our board meetings, we discuss the main funds that we typically use, our education fund, our operations, our debt service, and the rainy day. This would include all funds. So this would be all of our grants that we receive from the state and federal levels. This would include food service. This would include all of our clearing accounts. This is the whole shooting match as far as what we have from a fund balance standpoint. You can see we've remained fairly flat with a slight decrease. And that is to be expected. As we look here in the next couple of slides, I'll kind of explain a little bit more about why that is. But a lot of it has to do around with the bond issues that we've been doing. As you issue the bonds up front, obviously we receive all of that cash, so that's going to give us a boost in that cash. And when I talk about the fund or the fund balance as a percent of expenditures and also the annual deficit and surplus, I should go ahead and click there. We can see. You see that the surplus went up dramatically this past year. That is largely in part to do with the bonds that we've been issuing. And so obviously this can be a little misleading, and I will tell you probably next year it's going to be misleading because it's going to probably, what I would forecast is look significantly less than this, perhaps even into the deficit state. And that's only because, if you think about it, in the very end of 24, in December of 24, we issued our 2024 GO bond. So we received over $5 million in cash from the sale of that bond. Well, next year we're going to have to start spending that money. But we're not going to be receiving that money again, obviously, because we're not going to be selling another GO bond. Now, we will sell the transportation lease bond, so that could help offset it a little bit. But just so you are aware that if not here within the next year or two, as we start to decrease or slow down the issuances that we're doing in our bonds and actually start spending that cash, it's going to start going into having more of a deficit pattern. So again, to be expected, nothing out of the ordinary, and it's just something to kind of point out. But that's the reason why you see we have over a $6 million surplus this past year, and why that's so high. When we look at fund balances as a percentage of operational expenditures, so this is looking at the major funds here. So the operations fund, the education fund, the rainy day fund, and our debt service fund. So we take the cash balance at the end of the year of all of those funds, and then we divide that by the total expenses from all of those funds over the year. You can see that we're slightly over 32%, remaining fairly flat from where we were last year. Again, just having to do with where we've been as far as the salaries that we have been able to kind of push that cash back to the teachers that we did a couple years ago, which is why you've seen a significant decrease there over the last 3 years. And again, we've talked about deficit spending when it comes to one of our board goals. That's where you're seeing this, where we did have a little bit of that deficit spending over the last couple of years because, again, we felt like we had built up a big enough reserve in the education fund to start passing some of that along to the teachers. And so that's where you're starting to see that spend down, and that's what this graph is really showing. But then you can see there over the last year that's really flattened out, and we're going to continue to maintain and focus on making sure that that remains flat so that we're not in that deficit spending pattern anymore. This is just showing revenue by type, so where our different revenues are coming from. So we have local funds, which are going to be the property taxes, the funds that we generate for our operations fund and for our debt service fund. The gray bar is the state tuition support funds that come into the education fund to pay our teachers and staff there. And then the other areas would be, there are the stimulus dollars, which is actually a very small sliver at the very top. That'll be the last year for that because last year was the last year we had to expend the ESSER $3. So we did get those spent, and so that's been completed, so we won't be seeing that anymore. But again, this is just kind of a breakdown of where our dollars are coming into the district from. And then this one's the easiest one. We do not have any referendums, so that makes this one just a flat 0, and we do not anticipate that changing. So that is the DUAB indicators, as you would say, for the fiscal report. There is no action that is needed by the board, but more than happy to answer any questions.
I have a question about the student demographic slide. You'd mentioned the decline in the special ed. You seemed a little puzzled by that line. Dr. Schaefer, aren't those numbers kind of studied throughout the semester so that there'd be a better understanding of how that line got to where it is so that it could actually be explained at this point?
Yeah, except these numbers are given to us from the state, and we're not thinking they're matching what we're seeing locally, to your point. So we just want to go back and double check and say, hey, because we don't, and just work it off memory, we don't remember our special ed, the actual physical number of students we're serving, that number declining. It's continued to go up, and that's why we're a little bit confused why the state's showing this number going down, because you'll have the number of disabilities, and sometimes those can be duplicated. But we believe this is just a raw number of students served, so we just want to verify that.
Okay, thank you. And then, Mr. Herbert, on the deficit surplus slide, you'd mentioned the, as you presented it there here this evening, but and the ability of this to present a inaccurate picture I guess it's kind of how you stated it. Is there a way to remove the bond funding and so forth from this slide so it would maybe present a more accurate picture? of where we're
I could
currently
work
at?
I could work on breaking that out. Like Dr. Schaefer said, these are provided to us from the DUAB.
Okay.
Yeah, that I could work on doing. I guess it's not it's a true statement of where we are, but it just kind of gives like I explained, a little bit, not necessarily sustainable outlook on what things are looking like, just because of the timing. It's more of a timing issue is probably the best way to describe that.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Any other questions? Next item on the agenda, receive report on investments for 2024, Mr. Herbert.
thank you, Mrs. Cherry. Let me get my investment. Pulled up here. Okay. So here we go for the 2024 investment report. So this will just kind of cover different balances. A couple of the highlights here for 2024. Cash or balances remain very stable. We were at just slightly over 25 million last year to just 24.5 million for 2024. Again, a lot of that doing with the bond issuing and the flow of cash for that. We had total interest earned in 2024 was up again another 29.11%. To just slightly under $1 million in earned interest. Wish we could have found another $900, but we were almost there. But still, really strong number for the interest earned on our dollars here over the last year. We had capitalized on the increase in the interest rates by investing in the Hoosier Fund. We've talked about that. They've continued to have the highest rate with the most liquidity that we're able to get and access our money as we need it. Then we've continued to provide pay increases to teachers and support staff across the district. Interest rates remain high compared to the previous couple of years. And again, looking at to earn amount really that's been the highest in the last 10 years. I was actually just talking to Dr. Schaefer, and I'd like to take credit for that. I'll take some of the credit for that. Some of that is having to do with what the Fed funds rates are doing. I could say maybe I'm the one, I'll take credit for pushing them up, sure. No, I had nothing to do with that. But again, that number there, that almost $1 million was the highest we've had in the last 10 years. I look back, and when I first started in 21, our interest earned income that year was just about $5,000. So as much as I'd love to take credit for that, I'll take credit for it. Trex program, again, we've continued to see success in the collection of our delinquent fees. Obviously, the fees that we can charge have been decreasing, so that started to go down a little bit, but we're still using that program to collect any delinquent fees that we do have. Here's cash balances as you look through our different accounts that we have. We have our Huntington primary account. We also have our food service account, textbook account, payroll account, Trust Indiana, which is where the Trex money comes into, and then we have our Hoosier Fund. So you can see beginning of year balances there, along with the ending of the year balances and the interest that we've earned in each one of those accounts. Obviously, with the Hoosier Fund being the highest, which that's the money market where we keep a majority of our cash with the best interest rate that we have right now. Again, here is where the comparison, if you look at the interest that we've earned, which would be the red line versus the Fed funds rate, you can see how much that pretty much mirrors that. So that's good, that's bad. Bad being, as you can see this past year, we've started to see interest rates decrease a little bit. So we're going to expect for our earned interest to probably start decreasing with that a little bit as well. I haven't really run the numbers fully through to tell you if I anticipate how much we're going to be earning for this next year, because we have earned some more dollars just because we have more bond dollars from the project, but we also have to spend those dollars as well. So it's just still more of a timing issue. But again, we'll continue to capitalize and make sure that we're getting the best that we can for our dollars there. So as we look at 25 moving forward, again, we're going to continue to look at the investment strategies, make sure that we're maximizing rate and liquidity in both of those. We're going to continue to use the Hoosier Fund until I find something that has a better interest rate. And we're going to continue to use the Trex program for our fee collection. We will continue to look for future investments in CDs as rates start to flatten out. If we find that we can perhaps invest some of those dollars for a little bit longer but maintain a higher rate, we'll look at that. And then our current borrowing rates are, again, still fairly low. The last issue that we've done here, we actually got a pretty good rate, roughly around 3.5%, a little bit over 3.5%. So we're still, the amount that we are paying in our borrowings is still less than the amount that we're actually earning on the dollars that we have. So we're still making sure that we meet all the regulations and requirements that we have to spend those down so that we don't have to pay any of that interest back as well. So I'm sure our attorneys would love that I say that. So again, that's moving into 25, but that was our investment report here for the year. So again, no action required by the board, but would answer any questions that you might have.
I'm going to ask one question here because I think it's going to tie in later possibly. But on the highlights of 2024, the total interest that we earned of that $999,105.60, how much of that interest came from the rainy day fund?
I would have to break that out for you. I don't have that number. I could get it for you though, but I don't have that broken out. So
And what is the balance of the rainy day fund right now?
right now we're 3.6 million that we have in there.
Thank
Sorry, I got to jump meetings here. Because we did add 50,000 at the end of the year. Our rainy day fund, we have 3,666,745.
Say that one more time.
Sorry, 3,666,745.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So essentially, when you said you put 50,000 back in, sorry, but
You're fine.
does that even, what would the interest earned on that money? What would it have been more than that? Wouldn't it?
On the,
Rainy day fund.
Yeah, so it's-
It's sitting in the Hoosier.
it's sitting in the Hoosier Fund, yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
making it 3.6 million, what?
4.52, I think.
Right, so what's that number on a year? What would it, the interest earned?
So it's still earning the same interest because what I do, if you, really the transfer from operations to educate, or operations to the rainy day, it's just a transfer on paper. The cash, the tangible cash, it's all still sitting in the Hoosier Fund.
In one big account?
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's still, that's why we're trying to earn that full amount on all of our dollars, not just breaking it down specifically by, okay,
By fund.
I'm going to take this much money for the rainy day fund and it's earning this amount. You know, it's kind of all, it's all put together from a tangible standpoint. Now, obviously, we track it through the accounting side of it to make sure that
And
we're
the
still.
50,000 that we just transferred was from education to.
That was from operations to rainy day.
From operations to. rainy day.
Operations, yes.
And all that money goes, the $1 million, roughly close to $1 million interest earned, it goes back into operations.
Not all of it, because that does include some of the bond dollars that we have invested. Bond dollars that earn interest, those have to go back into the project.
Okay.
But everything that's not tied to a bond, yes, goes back into the operations fund.
And I'm just kind of, as I looked at this ahead of time, we got a resolution coming up for some transfers. And I think about what the rainy day fund was for. And in that resolution, we're taking all the interest from da-da-da-da-da and rainy day fund and deposited it into the operations. And I guess in the back of my mind, thinking like an investment account, you want to keep your dividends in that account. And we know that we're trying to target the rainy day fund to cover, 3 payrolls and have some extra cash. And so if you took the 3.66745 million, times that by 1 point whatever percent that you're getting on interest, and you followed that path for 2 or 3 years, along with putting $50,000 into the rainy day fund, wouldn't we be getting ahead a little bit of trying to cover those 3 payrolls and having that extra cash given our increasing payroll year to year?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, in theory, we could, if we did that, obviously let the interest build up in the rainy day fund. However, that would then short the operations fund, because again, we're essentially using that interest for the operations fund. Again, I guess you look at it two ways. You can look at it as far as the rainy day fund, and it has dollars, and if we want to set those dollars aside and let those earn interest and let it accumulate there in that account, we could do that. What we've been doing in the past, though, is that we take those dollars and we're transferring those to the operations fund because we still need those operational dollars. Again, it goes back to legislatively how, we're seeing 6% growth in students, which, like we've talked about, comes with additional costs, comes with additional items and things that are needed, but we're only limited on how much we can increase the levy in the operations fund. So as our students grow 6%, but I can only grow my operations fund by 4%, there's a 2% gap right there that's just for new students and not for any of the additional expenses, or not even to mention, inflation that we've seen be as high as 9% in the last couple of years. Obviously it's coming back down to a little bit more normalized, but still a little bit high. But still, it's taking away from the operational dollars that we have to use. So that's why we're trying to funnel as much into there as we can. Because ultimately, the more that we spend out of the operations fund with the less dollars we put in there, it's going to have to be made up typically by doing a transfer from the education fund to the operations fund, which we know we've tried to limit that.
Or continue to monitor wants versus needs.
Sure,
in the
yeah.
operation.
Oh, that's a,
And I
yes.
guess, to me, this kind of spins back around to our earlier finance meeting in the fall where we were addressing our board goal of meeting the 85-cent debt service rate. And we didn't get there. We didn't take it down to that. Again, just channeling thoughts into my process of trying to understand some of our reasoning.
Sure.
And ultimately, it seems like, again, it kind of comes back to a wants versus needs. For example, we talked about the spending needs within the operations budget. If a person needs to spend more in their personal life and they start taking money for dividends out of their account, they're not necessarily going to have the rainy day fund that they might think or that they may need. So it's just kind of a comparison. Maybe it's not a good comparison, but just trying to understand that thought process a little bit.
Sure.
There.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, next item on the agenda, consider approval of interest on investments resolution. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherry and Mr. Bryan. This is next thing on the items or on our list here. So this resolution is just stating that the interest that we do earn would be transferred into the operations fund or deposited into the operations fund. That's what this resolution is for. Again, like we just kind of discussed, if we do pull interest out of there, because we do have the option that we can put that interest into the operations fund, we can put it into the education fund, we can put it into the rainy day fund. But the more dollars that we're pulling out of the operations fund, just due to the fact that statutorily I'm limited on what we can levy in order to cover those expenses in the operations fund, that's why we've had the interest deposited into the operations fund. So again, this resolution that's before you would be to allow us to continue to have the interest earned deposited into the operations fund here for the year 2025. So again, I would answer any questions that you might have and ask for the board's approval on that. And actually, this one we do need to take a vote for. So,
Motion to approve interest on investments resolution as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hensel. Comments or questions?
I guess just for reference, I'd still like to follow Mr. Herbert in reference to what our interest earned on the rainy day fund was for 24.
yep, I can get that number for you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, consider approval of distribution of local tax income. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherry. Again, this follows kind of the same conversation we've just had with the interest that we deposit into the operations fund. We do receive local income tax revenue from the county that we receive on a monthly basis. Again, we have the option that this can be deposited into a couple of the different funds, operations, education, rainy day. We've always elected to have this deposited into the operations fund for the various reasons that we've already discussed here this evening. And so this resolution would be for us to continue doing that. So I would ask for the board's approval of that. And again, another item that we would need a motion and to vote on. But again, we're happy to answer any questions.
Motion to approve distribution of local income tax as submitted.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Ward. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Comments or questions?
What's the total dollars on the local income that we normally get?
It's about 26,000 per month.
So.
Should be able to do that off the top of my head, but
Yeah, the county,
It's late.
the county makes that determination on how much lit each of the school corporations receives, and they've been good to distribute some of that to the school districts. So, I know there was
Is it equal per school
yeah,
district
I think it's probably
I-
based on an enrollment.
enrollment size?
yeah, I'd have to check for to verify.
That money comes, how's the camp, where do they get that money from?
Calculation, you mean?
Yeah, how do they calculate, or the county
So-
tax that we pay?
Yeah,
I
it's
believe-
it's taxed off your income tax.
Yeah.
Okay, off the income, okay.
And then
Even
it's up
even if
to-
you live in Henderson County and work outside, there's still a lit that's collected.
In your,
Yeah.
in your payroll, there's a county section every time, well, some of us, every time we
Yeah, I
get a
don't have one
payroll,
of those,
that's how that
but, yeah.
works. So that's where that's coming from.
But I believe it's up to the county commissioners to determine where that's distributed or how that's
How that's-
distributed. So, yes, they have been gracious to do some of those distributions back to the local school districts.
Do
And
they
that,
get
that
some,
is, depending on what happens with the fire district, that is something that can be impacted because the fire district then becomes another sliver in the puzzle piece of who gets that money.
It is, but there's also a safety local income tax that's separate from that as well. So I'm not sure how both of those will be affected. I think the safety piece will be affected more than the local income tax. If the county commissioners decided to give also a lit sliver to them, it could be. If they decide to let them work just with the safety lit, then it may not impact us because we don't receive a safety lit.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, consider approval of financial institutions. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you. Before you have the list of financial institutions that we have either previously done business with or are currently doing business with. We have these approved at this meeting every year. This kind of gives us the authority to go out and, again, continue to do business with them. For this year, we're going to keep the same ones that we've had in the past. That would be Hendricks County Bank and Trust, Huntington National Bank, North Salem State Bank, PNC, and then also the Hoosier Fund or CFR Financial Group. So this is just a yes or no. So I would ask for the board's approval of this, and again, happy to answer any questions.
Motion to approve the financial institutions as presented.
so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hemsel, and then I'll take Mr. Bryan as a second. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda, consider approval of ordinance authorizing the investment of public funds. Mr. Herbert.
Thank you, Mrs. Cherry. So this is an ordinance. Per the statute, we can invest, and I'm talking about CDs now would be the investment that we're talking about, or the vehicle we would be talking about. We can invest up to 2 years into a CD currently as the statute sits. What this ordinance would do would allow us to be able to go past that time frame from 2 to 5 years. Per statute, we cannot go any more than 5 years, and I don't think anyone would want to go past 5 years. Obviously, for the past couple of years, we wouldn't go past 6 months. But again, this is just something that we have passed in the past, or I guess approved in the past, just in case there were something that were to come up that we have the opportunity that would present that we would make an investment for the 2 years to 5 year maturity period. Obviously, as it states in there, it cannot be any more than 25% of our liquid cash, but it would be just for the ability to be able to do that. Again, like I said last year, I don't foresee us using this. I don't think it'd be very wise of us currently to look at something for an extended period of time like that. But things are always changing. So this is just kind of one of those just in case. So would ask for the board's approval of this, and again, happy to answer any questions.
Motion to approve ordinance authorizing the investment of public funds as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Ward. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hemsel. Comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Consider approval of resolution authorizing investments of public funds.
Thank you, Mr. Cherry. So this resolution would allow us to go outside of those 5 or so institutions that we just approved. Typically, if we do a CD, what I would do is I would send that out for bid. and then we get those bids back in, and then we just go with the highest bidder at that point in time. Chances are that the highest bidder might not be on that list, but they would still be an approved institution here in the state of Indiana per statute guidelines, so we are still governed by that. But this would just allow us to go outside of the list that we've already approved here this evening. So I would just ask for the board's approval of this resolution, and again, happy to answer any questions.
Motion to approve the resolution authorizing the investment of public funds as presented.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Ward. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Comments, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. All right, final item on the agenda, I need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Hempsel. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Ward. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously.
Hey, that was pretty good, guys. You got through a lot.
Sometimes our regular meetings take longer.